Once, in Devon, in one of the long houses where there were no upstairs, a family came, for in those days the great houses had been tenanted. I say a family, but in fact the family consisted of two brothers and their sister, all of them adults. One day, as the nights lengthened, the girl went to bed a little before her brothers, as was often her custom. As she was getting ready for bed, she looked out of the window. Now, she was a wild thing, and had not drawn her shutters, for as she said, she liked to see the storms upon October nights. And she looked across the fields and the gardens, and it seemed to her, far off in the copse, where nothing should be, she saw two pinpoints of light, but she thought nothing more of it, and continued getting ready for bed. Well, just as she was about to climb into bed, she looked at the window again, just by custom, to see if the moon had risen. But she saw no moon. Rather, she saw, strange, a figure moving backwards and forwards, left and right, scuttling almost as if it was a little wizened spider. Then all of a sudden she saw the two pinpoints of light, but they were much bigger now. They were eyes, and it saw her and came straight to her window pane. Now she was pleased that in those old houses the windows were locked and made fast at night. And she looked as she saw little wizened hands prying at the window, trying to force his way in. And she tried to turn, to flee, or even to scream. But it seemed to her voice was frozen, and her tongue would not move, and her legs would not obey the commands of her mind, while all the while the figure outside fumbled at the catch, and then, finding it locked, started to make another sound. Pick, 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 and with a sudden start, a sudden terror, the paralysed girl realised it was picking out the lead of the window panes, one by one by one. All too soon it had made a hole quite big enough for it to climb through, and it squeezed through a little wizened thing, a thing of nightmare, a thing of dream, a thing perhaps of an earlier time, and in a bound it was upon the frightened girl, and all of a sudden her voice came back to her command, and she shrieked as she had never shrieked before, and her brothers, who had been sitting up, came clattering into her room. They ran in with their swords and their pistols, for in those days people had both in their houses, and there they saw their sister lying on the bed, and over her, her mouth bloody with the bite that it had made into their sister's neck, the strange wizened creature, and the brothers ran at it, but seeing them, it fled out of the window and across into the dark, and they pursued it as best they might, but thinking of their sister, they made their way home before they ever saw where it went to. Well, the girl was very shocked and had lost a lot of blood, but she was sound enough and healthy, and the three of them agreed to go for a trip through Europe, a grand progress, so that they may recover their shock. But before the trip was meant to be over, the girl, who was full of bravery, said, "No, I want to return to Devon," for she was a Devon girl and longed to see again the hills of her homeland. And so, unwillingly perhaps, the brothers agreed to return. They came back to the manor house, and this time the girl said, "Don't worry, it will be all right. I'll make sure I always close the shutters." And so she did. She closed the shutters night upon night. But then, one night, she heard once again the pick noise in the middle of the night, and she looked up. Now the shutters of those houses closed most of the window, but they left a little crack, and through that crack she saw the pinpoints of light, and she knew the thing was upon her. She called her brothers with a great shout, opened the shutter, and with her gun she shot the figure as it sat there, getting ready, perhaps to spring. And then the brothers were on it too, and they too fired their pistols, and drew their swords, and it ran. It ran as fast as it might. And the elder of the brothers, getting a lantern, followed it. He followed it across the field, across through the corpse, until he saw it clamber up a low wall, and he fired again. And this time he saw it stumble, and was sure he had caught it. And he sat on the wall after it had climbed down, watching it as it scuttled into an old chapel full of disused graves from a long vanished line. And he went up to the chapel, noting it. He, his brother, his sister, and the local parson came to that chapel in the morning light, and they looked at it, and it was full of broken sarcophagi and bones, all save the grave right at the end, the oldest grave. That seemed intact, and the parson signalled to the sexton, who had also come, and he opened it, and in it they found a little withered corpse with a leg with a gunshot wound in it. Well, they knew it for a demon or a vampire, and they did the only thing one can do. They took it out in the bright sunlight and burnt it, and it was never again known in that part of Devon.